Hi, welcome to the Academic Job Search Overview. I'm Deb Wingert from the University of Minnesota Center for Educational Innovation. In this voice thread, I'm going to spend a few minutes with you talking about the overall process for your academic job search. As we begin here, I would like you to download a copy of a packet that is a checklist and several rubrics that I have compiled for you as we go through this overview process. So take a look at the link here and make your own copy of the academic job search packet, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Hi all, thanks for viewing this academic job search overview presentation created by staff members at the Center for Educational Innovation. Rather than copy and paste the link on the screen, which you can't do with a video presentation, we're offering you a new link, and that link is z.umn.edu/academic-job-resources-gs. You'll also find that listed in a typed comment. Thank you again for attending this presentation.
This slide shows several considerations for you to think about as you approach your academic job search and the overall process. These are some of your considerations. First of all, institutional fit, looking at an institution, finding the best institutional fit for you. And second, getting started. Where do you begin your academic job search? And then preparing, third, several documents for your academic job search, like your curriculum vitae, also referred to as your CV, your cover letter, your teaching statement and or teaching philosophy, and potential diversity statement and research statement. We're also going to take a brief look at interviewing, how to prepare for your interview, and a couple of tips along the way. And also, when you go in person for an interview, you may need to teach a session or give a presentation. So I have a few tips to share about that. And then finally, what are your next steps after we've gone through this process? What will be your action plan, your next steps? Let's take a look at the first two considerations in your academic job search. First of all, what is the institutional fit that works best for you? Take a look at page 2 of your packet, and you will see basically 4 areas of higher educational institutions, from your doctoral research universities to master level universities to baccalaureate colleges, which are basically your 4-year colleges, and your community colleges. You can find examples of each of these types of institutions on this chart. And also you will find the general types of degrees that are offered at each of these types of institutions on this chart. Looking at your teaching role, what does teaching look like at each of these institutional types? You might be teaching at a major doctoral research institution like the University of Minnesota, but you may be doing more teaching at a master's level institution, a baccalaureate, or even the community college types of institutions. In terms of research, you might have a higher research role at a doctoral institution and less so at the other institutions, even though you might have some research role at the other types of institutions. And service, we've talked about teaching, research, and service in terms of advising and serving on committees. You may do some service at a university doctoral type of institution, and you might be doing more and more service as you teach at a master's level or a baccalaureate or a community college. So this gives you an idea of what teaching, research, and service, what those roles might be at each of these types of institutions. And it's important for you to think about what type of institution might be the best fit for you in terms of teaching, research, and service. Let's move on to page 3 of your handout and look at another consideration called getting started. So on page 3, you'll see getting started. Where do you start to search for positions? And I have listed several resources where you can look for position openings, position announcements, etc. And many of these links or these sources might be nationwide or even wider. I encourage you to take a look at some of these resources. And then once you find a position that might be feasible, that is where you might move forward and put together your cover letter, which we'll talk about in just a minute. I know some professors have said, read your position announcement at least 10 times to make sure that you are able to address every item in that position announcement. It is critical that you address the minimum requirements that are listed in that position announcement. And then another thing that I want to alert you to on page 3 is where you can look for information regarding salary. You will see a label there and links called Gather Information Regarding Salary. So take a look at that if you're interested in finding out that information, and we'll move on to the next considerations. The next consideration in your academic job search process is to prepare your application packet, and there are several documents to prepare. One is your curriculum vitae, and I have a rubric, a checklist that you will find on pages 8 to 12 in your handout packet. Also, another document to prepare is a flawless cover letter. You will find a rubric for that on page 13 of your handout. And then also your teaching statement, also referred to as a teaching philosophy, you will find a rubric there to help you, a template to help you on page 14. For those who need to put together a diversity statement, I have resources highlighted in yellow that you will find on page 3 of our packet. And finally, if you need to provide a research statement, or what is also called sometimes a research philosophy, I have some guidelines for you on page 16. We're going to go through each of these very briefly, a brief deep dive, starting with the next slide. When developing your curriculum vitae, your CV, there are several categories to consider. I have a CV rubric in our packet from pages 8 to 12, and I think the CV rubric has something like 17 categories and then 10 additional guidelines. You don't have to use all these categories. These are just potential categories for you to consider when you develop your CV. I encourage you to think about your academic life, what committees you have served on, what courses you've taught, what teaching experience you have. If you have little teaching experience, then you can add a category about your teaching interests that align with the position announcement. What research experience do you have? This is where you list in those categories research experience, and you put this in a format that is consistent throughout your entire CV. You will see many categories in the rubric. Again, you don't need to use all these categories, but look at them. And if you have anything in your academic career that falls into these categories, then that is a category that you use. One tip that I have to share with you in putting your CV together is to look at the position announcement. And if that announcement describes teaching as a primary role, then your teaching experience and your teaching interests will go on page 1 of your curriculum vitae, your CV. If your position announcement is primarily research, then on page 1, you will list your research experience first, along with your research interests that also align with the position announcement. Those are considerations to think about as you put your CV together. The point is that the first page needs to have your most important information stated in the position announcement mentioned first on that first page. So take a look at the categories, see what you will be putting into your CV, and you will see several areas there. I know some people who even combine categories. So these are not written in stone. These categories can be adapted so you can actually change the title of a particular category. These are the main categories that you will usually find in a CV. And finally, on page 12, you will find a few CV guidelines to review, such as making your CV without errors, without grammatical errors, without spelling errors, that sort of thing. Have someone look over your CV again and again to make sure that there are no errors and that it's ready to go. The next document to prepare is your cover letter, and you can see a checklist for that on page 13 of our handout. It is essential that you are applying for a position that is a good institutional fit for you, as we discussed before, that the position is a good fit for you in terms of the institution's expectations regarding your role in teaching, research, and service. I'm not going to go through the entire rubric with you, but I am going to share with you two major tips about writing your cover letter. First tip, in your first paragraph, you need to mention how you will meet their needs. So here's the big tip. The cover letter is not about you. It's about how you will meet their needs, how you can help them to meet their needs listed in the position announcement, teaching, research, and or service. How can you meet their mission at their particular college or university? That sort of thing. So it's to your benefit to go to their webpage and take a look at what is there, what is in their mission statement, and align your interest with that. It shows that you have checked their institution and that you indeed want to be there and that you can help them reach their needs. The other tip that I'm going to share with you pertains to paragraph 2 of your cover letter, where you share your significant qualifications or competencies that are required in that position announcement. I tell my students to prepare for the second paragraph by making a T-chart. That's just two columns. And on the one side of the T-chart in the first column, list every single requirement that is listed in that position announcement. And on the other side of that T-chart, the second column, list every single thing that you can do to meet that particular requirement. So when you actually write paragraph 2 and perhaps paragraph 3 of your cover letter, it's a matter of stating what they are requiring and then describing your competency for each of those requirements listed in the position announcement. That becomes your second and perhaps third paragraph of your cover letter. Those main requirements listed and how you can meet those requirements with your competencies in those areas. I'm not going to mention more about the cover letter. This voice thread, as you know, is just a brief overview. But there is some really good information in the cover letter rubric that will help you to write a cover letter that will not be tossed. Let's move on to your teaching statement. We will now take a brief look at putting together your teaching statement, also referred to as teaching philosophy. I have several areas for you to consider here. Please check the teaching statement template on page 14 of your handout. This template walks you through the main areas to address in developing your teaching statement or teaching philosophy. Even if you have already put together your teaching statement or teaching philosophy, please take a look at this template and check how it meets these main components, and then feel free to revise or tweak accordingly. Moving on to your diversity statement. Many universities and colleges are requiring this now. You can find resources in this handout on page 3, and the specific diversity statement information is highlighted in yellow, and that can help you to develop your diversity statement if needed. And finally, the research statement, you will find information on page 16 of our handout. I won't go into much of the details here, or any of the details, but for anyone applying for primarily a research position, you will likely need a research statement, and it is to your benefit to look this particular rubric over. Again, this voice thread that I'm sharing with you, this brief presentation, is just an overview of the overall academic job search process. There will be subsequent presentations that will go into each of these areas in far more detail than I'm sharing with you at this time.
Hello, just a little update here on the diversity statement materials, which the Center for Educational Innovation and the Graduate School have updated and included in a folder for your review. That Z link is z.umn.edu/diversity-statement-resources-gs.
Okay, we're going to take a brief look at interviewing. You will find interviewing tips in this handout packet from pages 3 to 7. The interview that you prepare for may be done by Zoom, in person, at a conference, by telephone, whatever the format. Here are a few tips to remember. At the bottom of page 3, you'll find a few tips to think about before the interview, such as practice what you're going to say, have your materials ready, that sort of thing. And then on page 4, you'll find a list of materials to bring to the interview, such as your teaching portfolio with your CV, etc., prepared and ready to go. Also on page 4, you'll find a few tips for you during the actual interview. For example, be prepared to share your information briefly, again and again and again. I'm not going to go through each of these tips in detail because, as I've said before, in future VoiceThread presentations, we'll be going into these in more depth. This is just an overview, but I want you to be aware of some of these tips. The tips on page 4 for you to consider are those to consider to prepare for before, during, and even after the interview, including following up a telephone interview, that sort of thing. On page 5, you will find some things to think about if you are given an offer, and how to negotiate a potential offer, and some other tips just to keep in mind. And then one of the most important things I've included in this packet is a list of common interview questions actually shared by previous candidates in their interviews. And I've included these questions for you to think about as you prepare for an interview. You will find this list of questions on pages 6 and 7. Very likely you're going to be asked a similar question or similar questions. You don't need to practice word by word, but to have a good idea of what they might be asking you, taking a look at these questions on pages 6 and 7 might help you in that preparation. I've even broken those down into a list of general questions, teaching-related questions, research-related questions, and most important, questions that you might ask to find out more about the institution. So what questions might you ask a faculty member? What might you ask the chair? There's a few potential questions here for you to ask and to think about, perhaps considering asking. Again, you will find the interview information between pages 3 and 7. In the interview process, you might be asked to teach a session or give a presentation. And if so, you will find a little guideline on page 15 of this handout. To help you prepare for that session, I tell candidates to break down the teaching session presentation into 3 parts and also find out who is your audience. The committee might say, pretend that the people in the audience are freshmen or sophomores or seniors or graduates. So find out who is your audience and then prepare your session accordingly. The guidelines that you will find on page 15 of this handout will help you to plan how to begin your session, how to deliver your session and or presentation, and how to wrap it up. And finally, I encourage you to have an action plan, being aware of what are your next steps in the academic job search process. You will find your action plan chart on page 1 of this handout, and you can use that to put together your action plan, your next steps. In this overview, I have gone through several considerations, and I want you to think about what is your next step? What is the institutional fit that is best for you? Where should you be looking for an academic position that might be your best fit? Regarding your CV, what is one thing that you might be looking at tweaking in tweaking your CV or in developing your CV? And then in terms of your cover letter, that is another area to consider in your action plan. What is your next step in putting together your cover letter? And finally, interviewing. Think about the list of interview questions and what questions should you prepare for? And even more important, what questions might you ask in an interview? I think we're pretty much wrapping up here, so let's go on to our final slide. I hope that this VoiceThread presentation has provided a snapshot of the overall academic job search process and has set the foundation for subsequent presentations that will provide more detail in each of these job search areas. Feel free to email me with questions, and thank you very much.